Hi everybody! In today's video I am going to be trying to make some miniature tiles for my doll's house roof. Now currently the roof is made out of paper and the colour of the tiles make them look as if they are slate. I'm not too sure whether to stick with slate tiles or whether to have sort of the more ready terracotta roof tiles, or whether to have a corrugated metal roof, because my doll's house is meant to be a warehouse that's been converted into an art gallery at the bottom and an apartment at the top. So I spent a long time looking at roofs, different pictures of roofs in the real world, and I was still stuck. I really wasn't sure what to do, so I thought it was time to just make a start. So I had a look through what I had in my cupboard, and I decided to start making little mini roof tiles out of some air-dried clay that I have left over from a previous project. So I gathered lots of equipment together, and then I started to think about the size and shape of each roof tile. So I used the tiles that were already on the roof as a guide to their size because they looked correct in scale. And I just drew over these tiles using some greaseproof paper. Of course, I could have used some tracing paper instead, and I made myself a little guide. I decided that each tile needed to be 1 inch by ½ inch because they were going to overlap. So I began by drawing a template for the tiles onto some greaseproof paper. I chose to use greaseproof paper because I plan on putting my air-dried clay onto this and I want it to be able to dry on it without sticking. So you might have noticed at the beginning of the video that I had some sand. It's craft sand that I'd bought from, I think, a craft charity shop, and I didn't want it to be yellow. I wanted it to be a darker colour so that I could use it to add some texture to my air-dried clay roof tiles. So as you can see, I had some watercolour inks and I was going to mix them together in this little yoghurt pot. But as soon as I put the blue ink into this yoghurt pot, I suddenly realised that the pot had a hole in it and I ended up with blue ink on my dining room table. I quickly tried to clean it up, but unfortunately it has stained the table. So I got another yoghurt pot and I started again. I checked that it had no cracks or holes in it before I started. So first of all, I added the blue ink using the pipette. I cleaned my pipette so that I could switch to a different colour. And I basically mixed together some blue ink, some sort of reddy pink ink and some yellow ink to try and make a dark brown or grey colour. So I added some of this sand and I was hoping to dye it a darker colour. I wasn't sure if this was going to work. As ever, it was an experiment. I was happy with how the inks had dyed the sand. So I made a start on making some little clay tiles. And I used this roller to roll out my air-dry clay. My cat was watching everything that I was doing and I was very aware that I had my pot of ink out on the table and I didn't want it to spill again. Thankfully she followed me into the kitchen and out into the garden so I could carry on my crafting. So I used a pasta roller to roll out the clay, and then I used this tool, which is actually for lino cutting, to try and cut the little miniature tiles using the grid that I'd drawn before to get the size right. As you can see, I quickly swapped to using a palette knife because the tool that I had been using didn't work that well. But this plastic palette knife didn't work very well either. So you will notice in a minute or so that I switched to having a cutting mat underneath my greaseproof paper and using a craft knife too. Obviously, craft knives are sharp, so please don't copy my techniques. So you will see here that after I'd rolled my clay using the pasta roller, I had added some of the sand to the surface and rolled it into the surface to make this texture. Some of the sand had lost a little bit of the colour after I dyed it, but I wasn't too worried because actually when I laid my tiles out onto my roof, I knew straight away that I am going to have to do something with the colour of them later on because this air-dry clay is a little bit too bright for my roof. I still don't know if I'm going to do terracotta tiles or slate tiles, but because I'm going to have to change the colour of them anyway, I can decide that when they're dry. So here I am switching to using a craft knife. Obviously trying very hard to keep my fingers away from the blade. And any of the leftover clay I rolled again and turned into more tiles. As you can see, some of the clay didn't roll through the pasta roller very well. I think this was because some of the clay was drying out a little bit. So the softer it was, the easier it went through the pasta roller. By the way, this pasta roller is only for clay. I use it for my polymer clay, and obviously I'm using it for this. I never use it for food. It's really important not to use your crafting materials for cooking. As you can see on this piece of clay, some of the felt tip from the guide that I'd drawn had transferred onto the clay. So when I use my miniature tiles, I need to make sure that you can't see any of the felt tip that's transferred. After I'd made a few tiles, I laid them out on the roof just to check their size, and I was really happy with their size, and I was also really happy with how different each tile looked. So for some of the tiles I didn't add much sand, and for some of them I added more, just so that I had some variety. This building's meant to be an old building, so I don't want the tiles to look completely perfect. I do want them to look a little bit aged and also handmade. I repeated the steps of rolling out the clay and then rolling the sand into the clay and cutting out each tile, and I laid them out on greaseproof paper to dry. When I rolled the sand into the clay, I was actually using a felt tip as a rolling pin. I could really do with a clay roller or even a marble rolling pin, so I don't actually have a tool for rolling out clay. And the felt tip worked really well, but actually I ended up with a felt tip that was covered in clay and sand and ink. So I am keeping an eye out in my craft charity shop because I'm hoping that one day there might be a rolling pin there for clay. After making lots and lots of tiles, I left them to dry overnight. And I haven't counted how many tiles I've made, but as you will see as I'm popping them into this tub, I have made a lot of tiles. Some of them were still stuck together a little bit, so this was a good opportunity to separate them. As I was separating them, I did notice that they weren't completely dry yet. So I don't know if you can see here, but there's a darker area of clay in the centre, so that's where it's not dry. So I popped them all into this box, but it does mean that I can't put them on the roof just yet because they do need to dry thoroughly. Maybe we should play a little game of how many tiles you think there are in this tub? If you want to play, pop your answer in the comments. How many tiles do you think that I have made? And I will tell you in next week's video how many I did, and whether it's enough, because of course I don't actually know if I've made enough tiles yet. I'll only know that once I start putting them on the roof. These are the tiles that I'd placed on the roof when I'd first started, just to check the size, so I took them off as well because of course they're not fixed in place yet. What colour do you think these tiles should be? Do you think I should keep them the terracotta colour but just make them a little bit darker? Or should I go with a slate tile? So I obviously now need to leave my tiles to dry thoroughly, and in the meantime I decided to paint this roof. Now the reason that I'm painting it before adding the tiles is because when I did my Tudor doll's house roof, I realised that it would have been much better if I'd have painted it a dark colour first. Because where there are some tiles with gaps in between, it's important that it looks shadowy underneath so that you can't see the lighter paper showing through. I actually thought that I had black paint in this bottle, but when I squeezed it out it was dark blue, but I decided to use this colour anyway. Because as I say, it's going to be underneath the tiles, and I don't think it will show through as being blue. It'll just hopefully look like shadows in between the tiles. As this paint was drying, it was actually drying quite a light colour, so if it is too light I might have to replace it with a darker colour, maybe black. But this is where I'm going to leave it for now because my tiles aren't dry, so I can't do any more. I would love to hear in the comments what sort of tiles you think I should have, whether they should be the terracotta colour or a slate colour. And in next week's video I will make a final decision and I'll start to add some colour to the tiles and put them in place on the roof. So please do hit subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want to hit the little bell button, I think that will give you a notification when I upload the next video. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed the video and it would be lovely to hear from you in the comments. I hope that you have a lovely day and I'll see you next time.